Performance notation as a means of documenting choreography once attempted to codify positions, directions, and intentions, but its fallibility and inaccessibility recognized, it did not translate to a variety of styles and is not understood widely by students nor professionals. As an architect and performer who has designed stages, costumes, choreographed and performed, I've looked at where the worlds of architecture and performance meet, how the archive, in the act of documenting, sees architectural tools appropriated for the recording and archiving, but ultimately the release of performance works, with the focus less so on creating barriers or dispute, and more so on extending the legacy of the performer, the shareability of their work, and an understanding of provenance and precedence within performance-related practices. As such, we deconstruct performances into a constellation of physical and digital documents, tools and objects, sourced from costume designers, set designers, choreographers, directors, performers, lighting designers, and vitally audience members. We frame the creation of the performing archive with these questions. Can a movement or a movement phrase be copyrighted? Is it permissible to borrow physical imagery, choreographic devices, or visual design if the movement or other elements are redesigned? And as performances are passed from body to body, how does personal lineage fit into our ideas of authenticity? From the following archive box, I'm unpacking the various objects I utilised to create this short performance piece. In combination, these objects provide evidence for this performance happening and its associated ephemeral, unrepeatable qualities. Virtual copies of these elements were made during the creation of the piece to simulate costume set and lighting before their physical real-world construction. After creating this performance, I filled out this diagram like so, and by giving hierarchy and values to these aspects of the performance, I could ascertain which of these objects were necessary to archive, altering the contents of the box from something which attempted to be comprehensive to only leaving the necessary items, which allowed me to assign the work with a copyright label indicating how the work can be remixed. Then I gave the forms, copyright, and explanation, a tool and technique booklet, and these physical and digital objects to another performer, asking that he create a performance of his own utilising them. The copyright labels I refer to are the Performance Commons logos. These are the main feature of this primer. The Performance Commons licensing, based on the Creative Commons licensing, seeks to increase the amount of openly licensed creativity in the commons, the body of work freely available for legal use, sharing, repurposing, and remixing. In the case of the Performance Commons, we have this series of conditions. The Bayou features in all combinations of these conditions and indicates that the original author is credited. The non-derivative indicates that any copy of the original must be exact or near to it as possible. The non-commercial must fall under the terms of fair use for the purpose of display or education, not for commercial purposes. The context-dependent may be used for works that are site-specific or cultural performances, which may fall under the category of intangible heritage. And finally, the share-alike, which if used for the original work, must appear in your work too and in any derivative thereafter. These can be used in a variety of combinations to suit the originator's requirements, altering the conditions under which copies are made. And in order to create the combination seen on the previous pages, I worked with choreographer Stephen Aspinall, reconstructing his 2012 piece Black Flies without his permission. At first I attempted to copy it as accurately as possible using the same location, choreography, camera angles and costume, and then subsequently made further versions, removing some elements, digitalizing the background, or re-choreographing certain sections. By the end of this process, we were able to create different combinations of logos and apply them to each version, and this was the conversation I had with him about these copies.
In terms of copyright claims and the fact that there's a sort of new commercial aspect, I think it's counterproductive or it's harmful to the exposure and therefore the legacy of the choreographer, which will then negatively impact their ability to, keep doing what they're doing, keep practicing. Choreographies overlap with technology. that your final video, exemplifies, is something that I think really pushes things forward, really captures what choreographers are trying to do nowadays, and which is, transcend the sort of convention of dance. Yeah, I would stress that it's not a dilution of the original routine. You're not taking something away, you're expanding. And that is, if you modify and adapt the original sample to such an extent that it becomes almost unrecognisable, then that's fine, because you've put it under a process of innovation and turned it into something new and almost unique.
The copying work is nothing new. This image shows Anna de Keersmacher's stage performance of Roses Dance Roses, shown here in a theatre in Brussels in 1983, then restaged for a film by Thierry Demey in 1997. But lastly, we see how this choreography is used for a music video released in 2012 without her permission nor any attribution. A more updated version shows how current copyright is not well enough defined to confront changes in technology, as in the example of game developer Epic Games, who produced Fortnite, using motion capture to recreate viral dances such as the famous Carlton dance by Alfonso Ribeiro, for which now they're in an ongoing legal dispute. But to see how detailed we could get into the reconstruction process or the reverse engineering of a performance, I looked at the work of Christine and the Queens. Her 33-minute long performance was live streamed from La Salle Playel, existed online for 24 hours before being removed, with traces being found on social media sites and tags connecting you to the various stakeholders involved, and various promotional clips gave hints of the set and lighting rigs. This was my reconstruction using some architectural tools and those traces. So this started with the recreation of the main tableau. I recreated each dancer before matching their position with that of the video. I then used a photograph of the set and used 3D software to match the perspective, allowing me to reconstruct various set elements, including chairs, fans, curtains, and lighting rig. I then found older performances in which she sang the same songs and motion captured the choreography. I then applied this to the avatars I had previously made. And then finally, the digital recreation of her shirt and its associated pattern, which allowed me to make it physically. We processed this performance testing 3 combinations of their potential outcomes. With the share alike, we could end up with a similar stage performance. With the non-commercial non-derivative, we could end up with a community theatre performance. Or with the non-derivative, which Fortnite could have utilised, we could use this choreography in a game. In the creation of the polygon diagrams, I used 3 exemplary performances, and by understanding the values of these performances, we can alter how we document them. Tino Segal's work is an example of a practitioner who is resistive to the conventional use or intent of the archive. He does not, nor does he allow others, to document his work. And in this progress, where audience members are greeted sequentially by a child, teenager, adult, and elderly person, the discussion is based around the question, what is progress? His pieces last from the time the host museum opens to the time it closes, and he allows the performing archive a single recording of a single museum visitor's conversation, utilizing a series of microphones attached to each actor. Since he utilizes the context-dependent non-commercial copyright logo, his works could still be remixed, developed into an audio tour guide experience or a spoken word piece, for example. In the case of Pina Bausch's Rite of Spring, we assess the peat-soil mixture, which must be made to leave residue on the costumes, while still remaining firm enough for the dancers to perform choreography. We take physical samples and scan them to generate digital copies, and as the piece consists of 2 to 3 repeated phrases, we motion capture the main phrase as precisely as possible, providing us with a physical and digital recording simultaneously, which we can orbit and analyze through 3 dimensions, correcting and defining positions or leaving the raw capture as it is. But when we move to the context-dependent Mongolian biryugi, the parameters shift. The setting and its creation, in this case a yurt, the costume props and movement, some of which may have already been altered or modernized, are all vital. In choosing the context share-alike license, the choreography could still be used digitally for commercial use, but must be performed physically by practitioners or those of Mongolian lineage. Recognizing the choreography requires only upper body movement, we can tailor-make tools for the performer, filtering out any unnecessary content. In this case, I designed a recording garment which would isolate the upper body movement during recording. From conception to being performed, to being edited and archived, edited in the archive, and then to being unarchived and used in the conception of a new piece, which in turn goes through this same process, the Performing Archive seeks to safeguard performances and their associated documents for future generations. We do this by opening them up to performance makers and students through these tools for analysis and appraisal, which enable reuse, reconstruction, and remixing, whilst giving attribution to originators. This gives performances traceable historical and spatial contexts. As the mediator between the architectural and performance worlds, I recognize that the ambiguity of current copyright can be transformed through this multidisciplinary practice. I hope to communicate how the combination of these copyright laws, these architectural tools, and the performance maker's needs for an adapted documentation structure has industry-wide implications, providing the framework within which to evolve, copy, and ensure the legacy of one's work, leading to the alteration of spaces for performing and archiving, and the invention of spaces for performing the archive.